Hi, I'm Courtney Brown, Vice President of Strategic Impact and Planning for Lumina Foundation, an independent, private foundation that's committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. It is great to be joining you today for a look into our refreshed Stronger Nation report on the country's progress toward a better educated population. As many of you know, it's been 2 years since we've been able to update the site. This delay was another unfortunate result of the COVID pandemic in 2020 and the inability of the census to obtain a sufficient sample size that made us feel confident in the data. Fortunately, the 2021 data collection was a success, which has allowed us to update the site and share it with you today. There is good news in this report, and that's actually good news for all of us, because education beyond high school is fundamental for the well-being of individuals, families, communities, and the nation. For decades, Americans have seen economic hardship grow, social mobility fall, and racial inequity and injustice persist. We certainly saw a great deal of it during the pandemic, especially for those with no education beyond high school. There is no simple solution, but to reverse these trends, one thing is true. We need millions more Americans to have access to and success in learning beyond high school. While about 2/3 of all jobs today and in the future require this level of education, just over half of Americans have attained it. This gap is dangerous to our citizens and to our democracy. Since 2008, Lumina Foundation has been advocating for the goal that 60% of Americans would earn college degrees or other high-quality credentials beyond high school by 2025. Over the course of that time, 48 states have joined the effort, setting similar goals. And since then, using the most current data from the American Community Survey from 2021, attainment in the U.S. for the working age population, 25 to 64, has expanded by 16 percentage points, from 38% to nearly 54% today. This is an increase of 2 percentage points since the last time we reported 2 years ago. It is the highest increase we have ever seen over any 2 years since we started counting in 2008. Here are a few other things I was really happy to see in the data. The population of the 25 to 34-year-olds has an attainment rate now of 56%. And while all race ethnicity saw growth in degree attainment since 2019, Latinos and Hispanics saw the largest increase by almost 2.5 percentage points. And Black Americans saw an increase of almost 2 percentage points over the same time period. Also, every single state, as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, saw an increase in degree attainment, including a 3% or higher increase in Vermont, Arizona, West Virginia, DC, Maine, and New Mexico. And when we look at attainment of all high-quality credentials beyond high school, that include not only degrees, but also certificates and certifications, 6 states saw an increase in attainment of 4 percentage points or more. These include Vermont, Indiana, Idaho, South Dakota, Utah, and Mississippi. For all that progress, though, there are 2 things that concern me. First, and most importantly, stubborn gaps remain by race, ethnicity, and income. Gaps that we must close if we're to continue to prosper as a country. Even with the impressive gains we saw with Hispanics, Latinos, and Black Americans over the last 2 years, their degree attainment levels of 27.8% and 34.2% respectively are still far below the national average of 45.7%. Secondly, while we saw gains in degree attainment across the nation, we saw a lack of growth, or in some places a decline in the attainment of high-quality certificates and certifications. These are 2 areas where we must continue to focus. And one of the most powerful tools for understanding and addressing these gaps and issues is Stronger Nation, which Lumina introduced in 2009. Stronger Nation is an online, searchable data tool that tracks the post-high school educational attainment of Americans ages 25 to 64 and 25 to 34, nationally, in metropolitan areas, in all 50 states, and down to the county level. It also includes data on the attainment of high-quality short-term credentials, such as certificates and certifications. It enables people to see where we're making progress and where we're falling short. With the click of a button, educators and policymakers can see where resources are most urgently needed and where they'll do the most good. You can use it as often as you like. It's free, it's easily accessible, and it's on our website, luminafoundation.org. As always, the data are transparent and easy to understand. And today I'll give you a quick demonstration about how you can use this valuable tool. So with that, let me take a few moments to show you how to access the data so you too can play around with it and find other insights relevant to your community and your work. If you have any questions as we go along, I hope you'll send them to us in the chat section, and we'll get to them after the demonstration. So let's explore the Stronger Nation site a little bit. There are actually three main parts to the Stronger Nation site: the national, the state, and racial equity. I'm going to show you some highlights on each of those areas, but I encourage you to go and explore because there's so much data here. We don't have nearly enough time to go through everything today. So when you go to the site on luminafoundation.org, you're going to first come up with the nation. And you're going to see where we sit as a nation at 53.7%. And then you're going to scroll down. And as you scroll down, you can again see where we are as a nation for the 25 to 64-year-olds at 53.7%. And you can see every state and where their attainment rates are. If you click on this button, you'll actually change it to the 25 to 34-year-old population. And you can see their attainment rate and what their attainment rate is in every state. So let's keep scrolling. As we go down again, you'll then be able to see the attainment by type of credential. So over here, we're at the 2021 data on the far right, and you can see the makeup of the attainment over here on the right, the types of graduate degrees, associate degrees, bachelor's degrees, certificates, and everything. You can see the trend lines from 2009, when we first started measuring, all the way up to 2021. And if you hover over any year, the numbers on the right will change to show those percentages and those credentials. So as you scroll down more, then you come up with the states again. And here you can play a little bit. So right now, they're organized alphabetically. You can see starting with Alabama all the way down to Wyoming. But I can also organize it by attainment. And here, they're organized by the lowest attaining state, Nevada, all the way up to the highest attaining, the District of Columbia. If you hover over any state, you can see their attainment rate and how much they've grown since 2009. You can also see the percentage, the population numbers for each of those states. If you click on that state, it'll take you to the state page. But let's hold off on that for a minute. Finally, on this page, on the national page, we have a section on race and ethnicity. And you can see attainment by race ethnicity for degrees. So we only have data on attainment for associate degrees and higher when we disaggregate by race ethnicity. But here you can see, very similar to up above with the credentials, the data for 2021 are here on the right, and you can see the attainment rate for each of the race ethnicities on the right. But again, you see the trend lines, and if you hover over any year, the data on the right will change to explain the data for that given year. So at the bottom of the page here, just as in the top of the page, we're given the options, the nation, the states, and racial equity. So let's click on states. When I click on states, I get all the options, and I'm going to pick one. So we're going to do Indiana, since that's Lumina's home state. When I click on Indiana, I see very similar data and a very similar setup to what I saw on the national page. I can see Indiana's attainment rate, and then I go down and I can see the type of credentials that make up any given year. Again, starting in 2021 over here on the far right, all the way to 2009. And again, the numbers on the right change to express the percentage in each type of credential in that given year. When I continue down, I can look at attainment by county for Indiana. So here I'm looking at Indiana, and I can see every single county in Indiana and where their attainment rate is. starting over here on the left-hand side with the very lowest attaining county, all the way to the far right with the very highest attaining county. And finally, I can explore race ethnicity for Indiana, or whatever state you're exploring. And it's very similar to the credentials, where over here on the far right, for 2021, I can see the attainment rate for each of the race ethnicities on the right. But if I hover over any one of the other years, the data on the right change to express the data for that given year. So if I want to explore another state, again, I can click on states and pick that. But for now, let's go to the racial equity page. So the racial equity page has much of the same data that we saw on the national and state page for race and ethnicity. You start at the top, and you can see the data by the nation, but it also allows you to pick a state. So if I want to see data for Maine, for example, I can look here and the data for Maine changes, the data that are provided here. Again, 2021, all the way back to 2009. The other thing that I'm able to do is explore in more depth by any race ethnicity. So you can see here that I am looking at each of the race ethnicities, and each of these circles represent a state. So I can look to see what the lowest attaining state is for the Asian or Pacific Islanders, all the way up to the highest attaining state for that population. In addition, for these populations, I can explore more. So if I want to go in here and I click on this button for Hispanics that is See More, then I'm provided with all of the subpopulation data that make up the Hispanic population. And over any one of these, you can see the list here is pretty expansive. I can cover over any one of them. So if I want to look at the Costa Rican population, I can see their attainment rate. I can see their attainment rate by males and by females. And this is for the 25 to 64-year-olds. But just like the other places, if I want to look at the 25 to 34, all I have to do up here is toggle this button over here, and I'm provided with the data for 25 to 34-year-olds, both at the high level and at the subpopulation data. So that's Stronger Nation in a very quick exploration. But again, I encourage you to go on here and explore some more because there's an extensive amount of data.
Wow, that was fabulous, Courtney, and thanks so much for the overview. We're transitioning now, everyone, to the question and answer portion. Courtney's actually going to be moving to another room. Actually, she's right next door, but we're going to have her move into another room. I'm just thrilled to be with you here today, as we've done before with previous Stronger Nations. This is Stronger Nation 2023, and I'll be your moderator for questions. My name is Dominique Raymond, Domi for short. I'm Strategy Director for Partnerships here at Lumina. And you know, teamwork makes the dream work, y'all. It's Courtney, of course, who just did this great presentation, but then also we have our colleague Chris Mullen, Strategy Director for Data and Measurement, that's working on, will be working on the questions with us. So let's bring it back to Courtney and dig right in. So Courtney, hi, how are you?
Hey, Domi. Great.
Good to see you as always. Okay, so our first question is from Jackie. And Jackie wants to know, you mentioned that this is the biggest 2-year increase in attainment, yet she sees, or he sees, a larger growth in 2013 and 14. Can you help him or her understand what's better? Why is that better?
Great question, Jackie. So I did say that we saw the largest 2-year gain in attainment in this most recent data. And you're absolutely right, because there was a jump in attainment in the 2013 to 14, and I think also in the 2017 to 2018 years. The reason the attainment jumped in those 2 years is we actually added credentials. So in 2013, 2014, we added certificates. So we saw a jump in attainment because we added a new credential that we hadn't counted before. And in 2017-18, we added certifications. So we saw a jump from that. But this is the biggest 2-year increase in attainment we've seen without adding something new. It wasn't just because we added something to the equation that it jumped up. And it's definitely the largest increase we've ever seen in degree attainment, associate degrees and higher.
Very cool. Wow, the questions are coming in. Our next question is from Sean. And Sean wants to know, why do you think that degree attainment increased, but short-term credentials did not?
Yeah, Sean, also a great question. So I think a couple things. So as I said, we saw the largest increase in degree attainment in over any 2 years, almost 2 percentage points, which is pretty great. For those short-term credentials, certificates and certifications, we saw those pretty flat, actually with a slight decline nationally, and then in a number of states, even a larger decline. I think this could be due to a number of different reasons, and I think it actually depends on a state's labor market and whatnot. But a few things that I could theorize. One, 2021, there was a lot of disruption going on with the pandemic. And most of these short-term credentials, you actually need to go in person. They're hands-on learning opportunities. And those just weren't available in 2021. We were all still home-based and doing a lot of things online. So one theory is that people weren't able to access those. Another one that probably happened also were people that had certificates or certifications before actually got an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree in that time. So they moved into the degree because we don't double count. And then there weren't new people coming into the system to get certificates and certifications. The other thing is that the labor market in 2021 was kind of all over the place. We saw increases in wages for all kinds of jobs that you only need a high school degree. And so as the labor market begins to stabilize, as more places are open for these hands-on learning, we've already seen that begin to happen in 2022. I believe and I hope that we're going to see those begin to rise again, those certificates and certifications.
Very cool. And so a somewhat related question from Jamarcus. Jamarcus wants to know, do you count badges or other micro-credentials as a short-term credential in Stronger Nation?
So Jamarcus, right now we do not count badges or these micro-credentials. So when the goal was set in 2008, we were counting all high-quality credentials beyond high school. And how we define a high-quality credential is one that alone leads to further education and leads to employment opportunities. So when we look at what those credentials are, a badge alone, we didn't find that it has that labor market value or that it leads to further education alone. We can make that argument with certifications and we can make that argument with certificates. And in fact, when we count certificates and certifications, we put a labor market premium on them. So for certifications, it's a 10% premium above what you would make with a high school degree alone. And with certificates, it's a 15% labor market premium. And we just don't find that yet with badges or micro-credentials. But as new types of credentials come on the market, as new things expand, we're always interested in learning more about those and examining them. But for right now, we count certificates, industry-based certifications, and associate degrees and up, including associate degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's, and whatnot. And no one is double counted. So you get your highest degree and that's where you're counted.
Super. Our next question is from Jan. And the question is, what is the source for this data for degrees?
For degrees, they come from the American Community Survey. So it's a census that happens every year. It's collected throughout the year. And the American Community Survey measures in 1 year. So they're collecting, many of you have probably completed the census at some point. And those data, the data that we're talking about now, were collected in 2021. And then the census does their analysis on them, and they make those data available in the fall of the following year. So the data we're talking about now came out between October and December of 2022, but they're reflective of the 2021 year collection process. So American Community Survey.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And our next question is from Phyllis. Are you concerned about activities in some states that might result in minority groups receiving less support?
Thanks, Phyllis, for that question. Absolutely. I mean, as I talked about, I was pleased to see the increase in attainment for Black Americans, Hispanic, and Latino Americans. Actually, all Americans increased in degree attainment across all races and ethnicities, and that's great news. However, although we saw that 2.5 percentage point almost for the Latinos and Hispanic population and almost 2 percentage points for Black Americans, you can see that incredible disparities continue to exist between Black Americans and Latino Americans on one end and white Americans on the other end. And we really need to make sure that we are continuing to focus on equitable opportunities for all people in the United States. And here at Lumina Foundation, we focus specifically on Black Americans, Latino Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans to ensure that they have the opportunities and that we have policies and practices that are helping them to not just access post-secondary education, but can actually successfully complete post-secondary education, and that they're then able to take those quality credentials and get a good job and have a good life.
That's really awesome. Chris is actually curating some questions for us. We just got one from Emmeline. And Emmeline wants to know, are certificates only credit-bearing post-secondary ed certificates?
So great question. So certificates are generally provided by a 2-year or technical institution. And so that's what we're looking at when we collect those. You can look at the methodology section of Stronger Nation to see how we calculate the attainment percentage of certificates. And so some of that does come from IPEDS data. So you're right, they are coming from those 2-year institutions. So that's what we're thinking about with certificates. They are generally credit-bearing type of credentials. And when I mentioned before that when we look at high-quality credentials, we are looking at those that lead to further education. Given that certificates are credit-bearing, those credits can transfer to associate degrees and bachelor's degrees and whatnot. And again, that's where one of my theories comes from, that perhaps those people with certificates are building on those credits, stacking those credentials, which is what we want to see, and going on to get other types of credentials.
This is awesome. So while we wait for Chris, he's sorting through all these questions and going to get us a couple of questions. I do have a question for you, Courtney. How do you think policymakers can use Stronger Nation? I know you talked about the tool itself, but do you have examples, like an exemplar of a state or an area or a region that has used Stronger Nation to move a policy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the people that use Stronger Nation, probably a lot of you that are watching right now, are policymakers. You may be state policymakers, federal policymakers, community policymakers. And from what we hear here at Lumina, individuals and policymakers and whatnot use these data to understand what's happening in their communities. It's a good tool where they can compare this community to that community or understand where their community is moving. It doesn't give all the answers, but it lets you know where you're being successful and maybe where you're falling short. So many different policymakers use it across the country to understand where they are and if they are making progress toward their goal. When we set the goal, I think I mentioned this, you might remember, when we set the goal in 2008, only one state had a goal, and that was Hawaii. Since setting that goal in 2008, 48 states have set goals, and they use the Stronger Nation data to know to what extent they are actually accomplishing those goals. So it's actually really useful data, and we hope very useful, meaningful data to people across the country.
Awesome. We've got more questions. Ivana wants to know, are there examples of states who have made significant progress in reducing opportunity gaps?
I missed the last part of that question, Domi.
So are there examples of states who made significant progress in reducing opportunity gaps?
We've seen all the states increase in race and ethnicity, and since I moved away from the computer, I don't have those data in front of me right now. But you can look at some changes that many of these states have accomplished over a number of years. When I mentioned that those 48 states had set goals, as part of a goal that we count, it is about addressing racial equity. It is about ensuring that they are creating policies and practices that are helping citizens that have been left behind and denied opportunities, giving more policies and practices to help them succeed in post-secondary education. So we're seeing those policies and practices being laid out. The great news is the 48 states. The hard news is that this is not something that can change overnight. So these policies and practices need to be made, and we need to continue to focus on them. It's not a chance to take our foot off the pedal. We need to keep ensuring that we are creating better policies and practices that are going to serve all Americans, especially those who have been left behind and denied opportunities. And we're seeing real progress already happening. I mean, I think when you look at the national data and you see that we've increased attainment for Latinos and Hispanics by 2.5 percentage points, that's because of the work the states are doing to increase that attainment. So we need to keep doing that and more of that.
Couldn't agree more, Courtney. And in fact, I feel like what a better reason than to use the tool itself, to get in there and figure those numbers out yourself. Ivana and everyone on this call would love to do that. A couple of more questions. Ostasia actually wrote a question that says, how does aging population impact attainment rates?
How does the aging population impact the attainment rates? Also a good question. So when we measure attainment, we're looking at the working age population. That is age 25 to 64. So obviously, as people age out, they're over 64, they are no longer counted in the attainment, but the younger population moves in. So actually, what we're seeing is good news for attainment, because the 25 to 34-year-old population actually has a higher attainment rate than the 25 to 64-year-old population. So as this more educated younger population comes in, attainment is actually increasing because we have more talented, credentialed young adults coming in. So it's really good news for the future of our country.
Awesome. And here's our last question from Norma. Does the tool dive into data for individual Native American tribes and nations?
Norma, that is a fabulous question. So unfortunately, it does not. As I showed you in the tool or in the demonstration, we have been able to disaggregate some of the groups. So you can look at the Asian population, and it disaggregates by all the subpopulations within the Asian population, as well as for the Latino Hispanic population. My colleague, Chris Mullen, worked extensively last year in trying to disaggregate the data by tribes and other factors. And it just became too overwhelming for the Stronger Nation. I can't remember exactly the number, but I feel like there were well over 400 different data points, which is really important. And we have that data, but we're not using it in Stronger Nation because it was just hard to keep that as valid and reliable data that we were able to use, and also to ensure that it actually represented the people that were in there. And so, when we're putting out Stronger Nation data, we want to make sure that it does speak to the people that it represents. So something that we will continue to work on and think about, and a really great question. But right now, it is not available in Stronger Nation.
Thank you for that, Courtney. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions right now. But we so appreciated you all joining us today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Courtney for the final word. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us today. And I hope you'll find the Stronger Nation tool as useful and interesting as so many others have. We all know the pandemic disrupted everything, including the ability for millions to enroll in and continue on an education pathway. While we see good news now, we know how important education beyond high school is to the prosperity of individuals, communities, and our nation. To meet the fast-changing needs of learners and labor markets, to help millions get on or back on track, to get ready for tomorrow's students who will be even more racially, socially, and generationally diverse, higher education will have to rethink, reinvent, and adapt its policies and practices. This will require new thinking, implemented by a variety of partners, driven by new approaches, and these new approaches begin with reliable data about the landscape in which we work. That's what Stronger Nation is all about, providing clear evidence of how well and where Americans are learning and developing the talent the nation needs. It can be an immensely valuable resource for anyone working in any state, county, or metro area to increase attainment and reduce stubborn inequities in educational outcomes. It won't be easy, but the stakes could not be higher. We will need sustained, equity-minded, broad-based, proactive efforts. We will need tightly coordinated education, economic development, and workforce policies as waves of people seek better lives through timely, accessible, affordable learning. With fresh insights from these new data, it's up to us to help the people behind these numbers, our families, our neighbors, our coworkers, and our fellow citizens, as we ensure that all Americans have equal opportunities to learn, grow, and contribute their talents. Only then will we create a truly stronger nation. I encourage you to go onto the Stronger Nation site and play. I promise you can't break it. Explore, compare your community to another, take a deeper look at which groups are being left behind, and determine what needs to be done in your community to change that trend. It's work we tackle every day here at Lumina, and we need all hands on deck to reach the nation's and our community's goals. These data are our first step.